Welcome to the End of Innocence. I'm your host, John Young. The last couple of episodes, we've been answering listeners' questions about Oswald's time at the Dallas Police Department in the days before his death. Last week, we looked at Oswald's assassin, Jack Ruby, and his suspicious behavior that weekend of the assassination. We also heard about Ruby's true relationship with the Dallas police. This week, we continue to answer listeners' questions, but the questions shift to the morning of Lee Harvey Oswald's shooting by Jack Ruby in the basement of the Dallas Police Department. Our questions this week come from across the pond, from Harlan in Sydney, Australia. He asks, was there anything suspicious about Ruby's Western Union transfer the morning of Oswald's murder? Were there any sightings of Jack Ruby around the Dallas police station that morning before he shot Lee Harvey Oswald? And in your opinion, how did Ruby actually get into the basement to kill Oswald? And did he have help from someone in the Dallas Police Department?
Something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
What will be done?
Yes, sir. What will be done with Oswald?
Well, he has been charged. He will be transferred to the county jail and await grand jury action on him.
Chief, when will he be transferred to the county jail?
That I don't know. As soon as we get through talking to him.
Chief, do you have any concern for the safety of your prisoner in view of the high feeling among the people of Dallas over the assassination of the president?
No, but necessary precautions will be taken, of course, but I don't think that the people will try to take the prisoner away from us.
Do you regard the county jail as a more secure place to house the prisoner? Is that why you're transferring him from the city jail?
It's customary after a man is filed on that he be transferred. We only keep him in our jail until he is filed on. After he's been filed on, well, then he's the sheriff's responsibility.
Will there be extra police at the county jail to assure?
I don't know.
When will he be transferred, Chief?
I do not know.
Where is the county jail?
At the end, about a block from where the president was killed.
On Saturday, November 23, 1963, the Dallas police announced they would be transferring Lee Harvey Oswald from the police station on South Harwood to the county jail the following day at 10 a.m. According to the Warren Report, at 10:19 a.m. on Sunday, November 24th, some 19 minutes after Oswald's scheduled transport time, Jack Ruby was still at home. Supposedly, at exactly 10:19 a.m., Jack Ruby answered a call from one of his nightclub dancers, Karen Little Lynn Carlin. She asked Jack if he could send her a $25 advance on her next paycheck. Ruby agreed to wire her money that day at the Western Union office. Ruby dressed, putting on a suit and tie, and then took his little dog Sheba along with him, driving his 3-year-old white Oldsmobile coupe to the Western Union office at 2034 Main Street, 1 block from the Dallas Police Department. At 11:17 a.m., he wired $25 to his dancer in Fort Worth. If Ruby had indeed intended to shoot Oswald that day, one would have to question why he took Sheba, his dog, along with him, and then left her in the car parked at the curb, while he walked less than a block to the police garage, some 75 minutes after Oswald had been scheduled to be moved already. Supposedly unbeknownst to Ruby, the police had not yet relocated Oswald to the county jail that morning. Oswald was still inside the police station due to a questioning session that had run longer than the police had originally planned. According to the Warren Report, Jack Ruby could not have premeditated Oswald's murder because Ruby had just made a Western Union money transfer only 4 minutes before Oswald's murder. Thus, if Ruby really wanted to kill Oswald, assuming he knew the time of the transfer, he wouldn't be cutting it that close. And again, Ruby had his dog in the car with him, which is not really something you would expect someone planning a murder to do. I mean, why would Ruby transfer money via Western Union at 11:17 a.m. and then kill Oswald just 4 minutes later? If it was really important for Ruby to kill Oswald, for example, because he had to do it on behalf of the mob or the CIA or whoever, why would Ruby risk missing his opportunity to take a shot by running an errand at the Western Union office first? Especially when he thought that Oswald was going to be transferred around 10 a.m., some 77 minutes earlier. The reality of Ruby walking from Western Union to the scene of the crime in less than 4 minutes is very high. We know this because Ruby actually did it. I've done it myself many times while in Dallas doing research. The distance from the Western Union office to the police basement where Ruby shot Oswald is only 350 feet. Some researchers have theorized that Ruby could have been waiting in his car at the Western Union for a signal from someone at the police department. While we don't know if this actually happened, the theory is possible because the entrance to the police basement is visible from the Western Union office. We know that Ruby made the transfer at Western Union at 11:17 a.m. But what was the purpose of this money transfer? And can the backstory of the money transfer shed any light on why Ruby killed Oswald? That brings us to our first question from Harlan. He asked, was there anything suspicious about Ruby's Western Union transfer the morning of Oswald's murder? Like I stated earlier, Ruby was sending the money to Carolyn Carlin, one of his employees who was a dancer at the Carousel Club. Ruby says Carlin called him on Sunday morning asking for an urgent advance on her salary for groceries and rent. But it turns out that the night before, Ruby had just advanced Carlin $5. Remember, this was 1963. $5 went a lot further then than it does today. Karen Carlin's husband, Bruce Carlin, told the Warren Commission the money she was advanced Saturday night was needed for gas so they could drive back to Fort Worth. But Bruce Carlin's Fort Worth gas money story is inconsistent with the testimony of Nancy Powell, who told the Commission that she gave the Carlins a ride home that night. And if Nancy Powell gave them a ride home, obviously that puts a hole in their gas money story. Also, the following Monday was payday for Karen Carlin. She could have waited just one day to get a regular paycheck. And when the Secret Service interviewed the Carlin's landlord, Weldon Thomas, he said that the rent payment timing was loose, and it would have been fine if she was just a few days late. This calls into question whether Carlin really had an urgent need for that rent money. On top of that, there's a discrepancy between Jack Ruby and Carolyn Carlin about whether her Sunday morning phone call was a spur-of-the-moment decision by her or was prearranged by Jack Ruby. Ruby says that Carlin called him on Sunday morning, but Karen Carlin says that Ruby prearranged the phone call with her in advance. Carlin says that when Ruby spoke to her on Saturday night, he told her to call him back on Sunday morning and tell him how much more money she needed to be advanced. According to Carlin, it was Ruby's idea to use Western Union to send Carlin the money. All the things we've just talked about make it sound like the Carlins are hiding something. But who lies about needing gas money under oath? And why not ask for the rent and grocery money on Saturday night at the same time she got the $5 for the gas money? And why bother asking for money at all on Sunday if you get paid on Monday and you have a flexible landlord anyway? When the Warren Commission interviewed the Carlins, they were among the few witnesses who brought their own attorney. Karen Carlin was interviewed a total of 7 times by the FBI and the Secret Service. During Bruce Carlin's interview, he was asked about why they needed the money and whether it was for rent or food, to which he replied, quote, "I didn't know that I would have to remember," end quote. The entire Western Union transfer thing is fishy to say the least, just like many other things in this case. Now to Harlan's second question. Was Jack Ruby seen around the police department the morning before he shot Oswald? According to Ruby, he left his house sometime after 11 a.m. on Sunday morning to go to the Western Union office to send a wire transfer to Carolyn Carlin. But there are 3 witnesses who say they saw Ruby earlier that Sunday morning when Ruby in the Warren report says he was still at home. Warren Ritchie, John Allison Smith, and Ira Walker were live TV broadcast technicians for a TV station in Fort Worth. According to these men, they all saw Jack Ruby outside of the police department building at various times between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. that Sunday morning. Ira Walker told the Warren Commission, quote, "I was sitting in the truck at the audio board. We were waiting for Oswald to be brought down. The press had been told that he would not be transferred until 10:30 a.m. in the morning. We were on a standby basis waiting for Oswald to be moved, and Ruby came to the window of the truck and asked, 'Has he been brought down yet?' He was standing on the sidewalk," end quote. Walker also said Ruby came back to the truck again a few minutes later to check on Oswald's status. The Warren Commission ultimately determined that the TV technicians, Walker, Smith, and Ritchie, who said they saw Ruby milling around near the police department on Sunday morning, must have been mistaken. Their testimony was deemed by the Warren Commission to be unreliable because the technicians had never seen Ruby before, and they would have been too focused on their duties at the moment to make a reliable identification. Still, the fact that all 3 men identified this person as Jack Ruby and that the man approached the car window twice so they could get 2 good looks at him up close makes me think their testimony should not be written off so quickly. So if Ruby was walking around by the police department sometime between 8 and 11 a.m., it means that he lied about leaving his house around 11 a.m. This potential fact that Ruby was at the police department near the area where Oswald was about to be transferred would also undermine the Western Union money transfer story, which is supposed to show that Ruby's decision to kill Oswald was sudden and random. If the 3 TV technicians were correct, the facts tip more in favor of Oswald's murder being a pre-planned event, which would leave more room for the possibility of a conspiracy. Harlan's third question is one of the most important questions that has not been answered definitively yet. How did Jack Ruby get into the basement to kill Lee Harvey Oswald? The Warren Report has this to say on the matter. Although more than 100 policemen and newsmen were present in the basement of Police Department headquarters during the 10 minutes before the shooting of Oswald, none has been found that observed Jack Ruby's entry into the basement. The Warren Report claims, quote, many newsmen reported that they were checked on more than one occasion while they waited in the basement. A small number did not recall their credentials ever being checked, end quote. However, there are numerous reporters who were present that stated the security in the basement was lax. For example, cameraman Stephen Alexander said that he was never asked for identification by any police officer and doubted that any other newsmen were asked for credentials. Ed Haddad, a radio newscaster, said that there was, quote, no security set up as far as he could notice, end quote. William Lord, an ABC News correspondent, said that he saw police and they did not ask him for identification. He did not see anyone responsible for identifying people who entered the Dallas Police Department basement. Jimmy Turner, a TV director, said, quote, up until the following morning after the shooting of Oswald, there was no checking of passes that we ran into, end quote. And that is just a sampling. Similar statements are on record in the Warren Report from Jerry O'Leary from the Washington Evening Star, Henry Rayburn from UPI, Seth Cantor from Scripps Howard, and Ira Beers of the Dallas Morning News. One would think that giving multiple and specific threats on Oswald's life that were called in the night before to the police department, the security would be tight and there would be protocols for access to the basement during Oswald's transfer. But that's not what happened. So how did Ruby get into the basement? The Warren Report is uncertain on this topic, but ultimately concludes that Ruby, quote, probably came down the Main Street ramp. The report says, quote, after considering all the evidence, the Commission has concluded that Ruby entered the basement unaided, probably via the Main Street ramp, and no more than 3 minutes before the shooting of Oswald, end quote. The Commission's conclusion is based on the idea that the person who was supposed to be watching the Main Street ramp, Officer Roy Vaughn, was distracted by a departing police car for just long enough for Ruby to enter down the Main Street ramp. Police Chief Jesse Curry put it this way.
Well, of course, it's been pretty well established by this time that he came in the ramp entrance, on the Main Street entrance. And the officer who was guarding this door had stepped away to permit a vehicle to come out. It wasn't necessary that he do this, but he had stepped across the sidewalk to assist a vehicle coming out of the basement. And that's when Ruby came into the basement. And this was less than 2 minutes before Oswald was brought down.
The Warren Commission's conclusions that Ruby came down the Main Street ramp is mostly supported by Officer Napoleon Daniels. He says that he saw a man he thought was Ruby walking down the Main Street ramp, but not during a time when there was a car coming, implying that Officer Vaughn must have allowed Ruby to get through. Here's Daniels in Mark Lane's Rusted Judgment documentary.
We are in the office of Napoleon J. Daniels, a real estate broker in Dallas, Texas. Mr. Daniels, have you been associated with the Dallas Police Force?
I was for 7 years.
In what capacity?
As a patrolman.
Where were you on November 24th, 1963?
Well, I was going down to inspect the assassination site around 11 o'clock, I guess, and I noticed Officer Vaughn standing on the Main Street ramp of the City Hall at the basement, and I stopped to go back to talk to him, and I asked him what his purpose was there, and he told me he was keeping anybody from entering the basement because they fixed to transfer Oswald.
How long did you remain in front of the Main Street ramp with Officer Vaughn?
About 20 minutes, I guess.
Did you remain there until you heard a shot?
I did.
From 11 o'clock until 11:20, did anyone enter the basement through the Main Street ramp?
There was one man about a couple of minutes before Oswald was shot.
Could you describe that man?
Yes, he was a white man, weighed about 175, and had on a blue suit, about 5'9".
What was the color of his hair?
It's brownish, and he's bald at the top.
Was there anything else distinctive about the gentleman?
He had his right hand in his right coat pocket, and something seemed to be protruding from it.
What was your impression when you saw him enter the basement with his hand in his pocket?
My first impression was that he had a gun in his pocket, and then I didn't think too much about it because Officer Vaughn didn't challenge him, he just let him go on down in there.
Did Vaughn indicate any recognition or knowledge of who the person was when the man passed by him?
Well, I just assumed he did because he didn't try to stop him. I assumed he knew who he was.
So Officer Daniels is pretty sure that Officer Vaughn let Jack Ruby down the Main Street ramp. But there are reasons to doubt that Ruby entered the garage through the Main Street ramp, despite what Officer Daniels says. Officer Vaughn, the guy who was guarding the ramp, said that he stopped and checked the credentials of all unknown persons, and the police car leaving the Main Street ramp did not distract him from that task. Here's Officer Vaughn on the British documentary The Men Who Killed Kennedy.
Ruby claimed he acted on impulse when he shot Oswald. His real motives were never explored. The Warren Commission believed everything Jack Ruby chose to tell them, including how he penetrated the basement security of Dallas Police Headquarters in order to kill Oswald.
I don't believe that Ruby entered the basement of the Dallas Police Station by way of the ramp from Main Street, which is the fiction that came about not long after he was arrested for killing Oswald. The policeman on duty at the top of the ramp was given a lie detector test, and he insisted that Ruby did not pass him at any time, and the lie detector test given by the police department bore that out.
Jack Ruby did not come down that ramp. I'll go to my grave saying he didn't come down that ramp. If anybody could have ever proved to me beyond a reasonable doubt that he came down that ramp, I feel that I was man enough to admit, yes, maybe I made a mistake or was negligent in some area. But no, nobody's ever proved that to me, and I'll go to my grave saying that man did not come down that ramp.
Only 4 minutes before he gunned down Oswald in the basement, Ruby had been at the Western Union office on Main Street, cabling money to one of his strippers. According to the commission account, he then walked down the street and simply slipped down the basement ramp unnoticed by Officer Vaughn.
Officer Vaughn is supported by other witnesses. UPI reporter Terrence McGarry told the FBI that at least 5 minutes before Oswald was shot, he had stationed himself at the middle of the basement end of the Main Street ramp, and that no one came down the ramp during that time. Harry Tasker was a taxi driver hired by a reporter to watch the Main Street ramp so that the reporter could follow Oswald to the county jail when he left the police station. Tasker told the FBI that he had been standing at the Main Street ramp entrance 5 minutes before Oswald was shot, and that no one resembling Jack Ruby entered the basement during that time. Police officer Don Felucci was standing diagonally across from the Main Street ramp on the opposite side of the street at the time Ruby would have walked down it. So Felucci would have had an excellent vantage point to be able to see what was going on. In his interview with the House Select Committee on Assassinations, Felucci said that there was no doubt in his mind that Ruby did not walk down the Main Street ramp that morning. Felucci was not interviewed by the Warren Commission. Dallas Police Officers Sergeant Putnam and Sergeant Pierce agreed with Felucci. Putnam and Pierce drove on the ramp at the time that Ruby was allegedly walking down it. They are the ones in the car that supposedly distracted Officer Vaughn so that Ruby could slip in. But Putnam and Pierce are on record saying that they are certain that Ruby did not come down the Main Street ramp at that time. Sergeant Pierce said that he knew Ruby and would have recognized him. Sergeant Patrick Dean was in charge of security that day in the basement. Sergeant Dean told the Warren Commission that Ruby told him he entered the basement through the Main Street entrance. But in 1977, when the House Select Committee on Assassinations was reinvestigating the case, Sergeant Dean told the committee investigators off the record that he had submitted 2 false police reports and that, quote, Ruby had not told him that he'd come in via the Main Street ramp, end quote. The HSCA had serious concerns about Dean's role in the investigation because Dean had failed his own polygraph, even though he wrote the questions. Warren Commission attorney Burt Griffin didn't believe that Sergeant Dean was a credible witness. Griffin wrote a memo about how he thought Dean was lying to protect his reputation and to coordinate the cover-up of the Dallas police letting Ruby into the basement. Looking at all this evidence, the only person who says that Ruby came down the Main Street ramp other than Ruby himself is Officer Daniels. Conversely, there is a reporter, a taxi driver, and 4 cops who say there is no way that Ruby came down this Main Street ramp. And then there's Patrick Dean, the head of security for the incident, who admits that he lied previously and submitted false reports, and that Ruby did not come down the Main Street ramp. So Harlan, to answer your question, we really don't know how Ruby entered the basement that day. Down the Main Street ramp or through a back door near the alleyway. It is my belief that for years of research that he did not enter the basement down the Main Street ramp. It is my belief that he entered the basement through a back door near the alley. Did he find that door unlocked, or did he have help? That's a secret Jack Ruby took to his grave. Let's hear from one of the experts about the question of Ruby and how he entered the basement. Here's one of the best researchers I've ever known, the late Larry Harris from the documentary The Man Who Killed Kennedy.
Well, clearly, Jack Ruby did not enter the basement via the Main Street ramp, as the Warren Commission concluded. And indeed, when Congress reopened the investigation in the late 1970s, they concluded he did not come down the ramp, and they cited 8 witnesses who stated that Ruby did not come down the ramp, and several of these witnesses knew Ruby personally. The Congressional Committee concluded that Ruby most likely used an obscure entrance into the building that was located in the alleyway. From there, he would have proceeded into the lobby to an unlocked door that led directly into the basement. Would have gone down that stairwell and actually entered into the parking garage area of the basement and proceeded toward the railing, up through the railing and into the spot where he was standing when he lurched forward to shoot Oswald. Clearly, it looked better for the department to say that Bond had accidentally let Ruby into the basement while his back was turned, rather than admit that a key area within the garage had been left completely unguarded, permitting Jack Ruby unchallenged access to the spot where he killed Oswald.
Larry's conclusions are supported by the immediate comments of several police officers recorded by live TV cameras just after the shooting.
And this man came from behind this camera or from this corner and just dove out of the crowd.
He came from behind that car, that green car there. He jumped up over the rail.
Yep. Patrick Dean was the head of security in the basement and was aware very quickly of the predicament he was in. As Ruby was being subdued, Dean remarked to Ruby, "Jack, goddamn, you've got me in one hell of a fix." So Dean was immediately aware of his predicament and, of course, began immediately maneuvering to put the best possible light on the situation.
There was about 15 to 20 men that had searched this place prior to 30 minutes. In fact, searched it twice, about an hour before and then 30 minutes.
The late Patrick Dean was adamant that the only way that Ruby could have gained access to the basement was via the Main Street ramp.
I'm positive that door leading from the City Hall proper into the basement was locked by the maintenance man in my presence that day on the inside of the basement side. And I also had 2 men stationed at that door. But I am positive that door was locked. Now, that door possibly could have been opened by someone from the other side. However, no one did come through there because, as I say, 2 men were stationed there as guards for that particular door that led from the City Hall proper to the basement.
2 reserve officers who'd been stationed there earlier that morning had been reassigned to points outside the building directing traffic, so that this left an area of vulnerability from the stairwell to the point near the railing where Ruby shot Oswald.
The bottom line is we don't know whether the cops helped Ruby get into the basement or not. The weight of the evidence is against Ruby coming down the Main Street ramp, as the Warren report claims. So he must have gotten in the building somewhere else. When you combine Ruby's words with the inconsistencies in the Karen Carlin Western Union story and all of the Jack Ruby sightings at the police department over the weekend, it looks to me as if Ruby had planned in advance to kill Oswald as part of a conspiracy. To get an idea of what that conspiracy looks like, we'll talk about that next week as we answer some more listeners' questions. We'll see you then. If you like what you hear every week and want to learn more about the assassination, please pick up my book, The End of Innocence, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It's available right now on Amazon, or you can find it at www.endofinnocencejfk.com. And hey, send me your comments about the book or this podcast at endofinnocencejfk@gmail.com. Also this week, I'd like to announce that I'll be speaking at the Citizens Against Political Assassinations, or otherwise known as CAPA, conference in Dallas in November. If you'd like to get a signed copy of my book or just meet and talk about the case, I'd love to see you there in November. The conference runs from Friday, November 22nd to Sunday, November 24th. I will be speaking about my book, The End of Innocence, and also I'll be speaking about the presence of professional assassins in Dealey Plaza the day President Kennedy was killed. I'll also be speaking about a second arrest in the Texas Theater that day. You could get tickets for the conference at www.capa-us.org. Hope to see you there.